Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to join us once again. I am Matt Helmers at Iowa State University, ISU Extension and Outreach, the Iowa Nutrient Research Center, and faculty advisor to the Iowa Learning Farm. So it is, as I've said, my great pleasure to be able to help to moderate these webinars. And we have another great topic for today. So we have Andrew DiAllesandro from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the State Private Lands Coordinator, to talk to us today about a really important topic of threatened and endangered species and thinking about strategic habitat conservation for those. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Andrew. As normal, if you have questions, please type those into the chat box and we will get those to Andrew at the end of his talk. With that, the virtual floor is all yours.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Matt. I appreciate the introduction, but I'm Drew. So instead of trying to worry about how to pronounce that last name, I go by Drew for the most part. But as Matt said, I'm the State Private Lands Coordinator here in Iowa for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And I really appreciate folks tuning in this afternoon for the presentation today. I'd also like to thank Liz Rickley, Matt Helmers, and the team at Iowa State for extending the invitation and providing me this opportunity. So today I'm going to briefly introduce the Partners for Fish and Wildlife program and our business model for those who may not be familiar with what we do. I'll then highlight our Northeast Iowa Pollinator Initiative as an example of how we deliver our program targeting threatened, endangered, candidate, and at-risk species in that landscape. Finally, I'll discuss a new collaboration we're entering into with researchers at Iowa State University to hopefully refine how we target projects within that effort, while hopefully providing new information to overall species recovery. My hope is that by highlighting some of these projects and some upcoming research, I can create ideas with folks who are doing similar projects, perhaps create connections to new partners, landowners, or provide another model that partners can use to deliver conservation in their respective work areas. So the Partners for Fish and Wildlife Program, or the Partners Program for short, is the private lands expertise of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Our mission is to efficiently achieve voluntary habitat restoration on private lands through financial and technical assistance for the benefit of federal trust species. So we have a business model that attempts to be as flexible as possible to allow for partnerships that lead to gains for species, people, and the land. We provide technical assistance aimed to help facilitate habitat restoration and enhancement on private lands. So when the goals of that project, that landowner or group of partners, when those goals align with those of the service, we can also offer a one-time cost share to help implement those projects. So the landowner or partner, what they do is they enter into a 10-year habitat development agreement, meaning they agree to maintain that project for a period of 10 years. Outside of that, there are no minimum or maximum acreage requirements, no cropping history requirements, nor are there any length of ownership requirements. Long story short, if it restores habitat on private lands, it's fair game. The only real limitation that we have in the Partners program is we cannot provide cost share on state or federally owned property. Now, we can provide technical assistance in some instances, and we can leverage other funding sources within the service towards those areas kind of opportunistically, but our funding stays on private lands. So with that in mind, I think it's important to recognize that from a program's perspective, county lands, lands managed by municipalities, and those managed by NGOs are all considered private lands to the Fish and Wildlife Service. So in a state like Iowa, where each county has a county conservation board, or certain land trusts like the Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation or the Nature Conservancy, where they have holdings, this really expands the available places and niches where the Partners program can be relevant. Ultimately, habitat conservation is what drives our work. Here in Iowa, we focus on waterfowl, migratory birds and other birds of decline, pollinators, and of course, the topic of this presentation, federally threatened and endangered candidate and at-risk species. Only those species that have a private lands nexus and that we can tangibly benefit, that's where we like to concentrate our efforts. So we strive to keep common species common and contribute to the recovery of threatened and endangered species. And these priorities aren't without reason, right? So not only are we mandated to manage some of these species, but they're the ones needing the most help, whether it's migratory birds, many species of which have experienced significant declines over the last 50 years, or the monarch butterfly, which is now a candidate species under the Endangered Species Act. Also, certainly no stranger to Iowa's conservation community with all the efforts and good work that Iowa Monarch Conservation Consortium has done. But also the rusty-patched bumblebee, which became the first bumblebee species to be listed as endangered in the lower 48 states back in 2017. And now that list is potentially growing with the American bumblebee, which actually was petitioned to be listed under the ESA back in 2021. These are the species, at least the listed species, that provide opportunities for conservation through the Partners Program here in Iowa. So we use several methods to help inform how and where we implement our projects and how we prioritize the use of our resources, which is time, our annual budget, and our funds. So for example, we use the rusty-patched bumblebee high priority and primary dispersal zone model developed by our colleagues in Ecological Services. So what this is a habitat connectivity model that considers the likelihood of rusty-patched bumblebee movement based on current land cover data. So the polygons generated from the model, which you can see here in red and yellow, they suggest areas with highest potential for the species to be present based on typical bumblebee foraging distances and suitable habitat around known occurrence records. So here's the latest model, which was actually produced just this past March. So it includes the known populations or the ones that were found last field season. And what this does is essentially shows the distribution of rusty-patched bumblebee populations in Iowa and beyond. And I'll touch more on that here in a moment. One thing that's important to consider is that here in the Partners Program, every 5 years, we help to develop a strategic plan that outlines focus areas, landscapes, and species in which we're targeting, and strategic partnerships that we can support and leverage to restore habitat. So here's what that map looks like for Iowa. We target specific efforts in the prairie pothole focus area, which is outlined in green. Actually, if some of the folks tuned in last January of 2021, you probably heard a colleague of mine, Derek Weisenflug, talk about the Topeka Shiner and Oxbow restoration effort that's going on there in the Boone, North Raccoon, and Rockford watersheds. So outside the prairie pothole area, we also have Eastern Iowa Rivers focus area, which is outlined in purple. And then the driftless area, focus area, which is in blue, which I'll kind of dive into here moving forward. But the orange polygon down in southern Iowa, that's what we're calling our Southern Iowa Opportunity Area, where we'll do projects as we're able, but due to current staffing and funding levels, we can't really focus on this area in the same way that we do the other areas. We've got some great partners down there, certainly Kelsey Fleming, a lot of the DNR folks, Iowa Natural Heritage down there. But I think once we get another staff member, hopefully here in the next year, we can then begin to target areas and conservation efforts down there. But until that time comes, we typically focus on the other three focus areas. So really what I'm describing is the Partners Program's step-down version of the Strategic Habitat Conservation Model, which is essentially the MO for how the Fish and Wildlife Service approaches conservation. It's an adaptive management framework that informs decisions about where and how to expend resources for wildlife species or groups of species and identify priority areas or landscapes. It's really right here in the SHC model at the conservation delivery point where the Partners Program steps in and makes its most significant contribution to the mission of the service. So next, I'm going to highlight one way in which we approach this for a federally listed endangered species here in Iowa. In this case, the rusty-patched bumblebee in our driftless focus area. So what we do is we take an approach that uses available information from partners, species, and landscape context. So here, again, we have the driftless area. So what we do is then we start adding layers of information. So first, we start with green infrastructure. So right now, as we look at this map, the orange polygons, which I apologize, might be tough to see, those are Fish and Wildlife Service National Wildlife Refuge System lands. So like where I sit here at Neil Smith National Wildlife Refuge, or up in the Driftless, that's the Upper Mississippi River Fish and Wildlife Refuge. We're always going to prioritize refuge lands to create connectivity, to buffer those areas. We do the same thing for the Iowa DNR's wildlife management areas, which are the yellow polygons there. And as I said before, county conservation boards, they actually provide a nice opportunity for us here in the Partners Fish and Wildlife Program, which are the green polygons. Anyway, this is the green infrastructure for the conservation estates, the land holdings in which we can work. We then add relevant information from existing planning efforts, such as bird conservation areas from the Iowa DNR State Wildlife Action Plan, which are purple polygons that you see there. Then we add our own models, such as I mentioned, the rusty-patched bumblebee high priority primary dispersal zone model. And what we end up getting is a focus area with several overlapping priorities. Well, that's fine and dandy, Drew, but what does this look like once you zoom in? So zooming in closer, we can identify some opportunities for the Partners for Fish and Wildlife Program. Iowa DNR mapped several hill prairies back in the northern part of Allen County back in 2015 or so that were in varying conditions. So some folks may call these goat prairies or bluff prairies. I cut my teeth on these areas along the Illinois River back in Illinois. So what I'm talking about is the same thing. As you can see here, these exist within and adjacent to many of the priorities we consider when allocating resources. Another way to look at this, or at least trying to identify these areas, you can do using LiDAR, for example. You can see here, these areas or potential areas, they very clearly pop out on these south and southwest facing slopes in a lot of these areas, like that red polygon, which is the high potential zone for rusty-patched bumblebee, adjacent to green infrastructure. So this is a typical scenario of what these areas look like. Once fire, grazing, in any manner that stops on these areas, undesirable woody vegetation, primarily eastern red cedar, really encroaches on these areas and changes these systems from a high diversity herbaceous plant community to a choked out scrub shrub forested plant community. Fortunately for us and endangered species, these systems are highly resilient and respond well to restoration. So what we and our partners do is come in and either physically or mechanically remove that woody vegetation to re-expose these areas to the natural processes that help keep them open. Once you do that, these areas usually come back. It then becomes crucial that disturbance, primarily fire, is returned to these open areas. When you can reintroduce the natural processes and disturbances, these areas become valuable resources from a habitat perspective, especially when you're considering pollinators, including rusty-patched bumblebee, American bumblebee, or the monarch butterfly. And finally, this is the same area just this past year. They're highly resilient systems that are the one type of opportunity or project through the Partners Program for threatened, endangered, candidate, and at-risk species. But we also target prairie reconstructions. These projects are more standard seeding areas, or seeding areas formerly in agricultural production back to native cover. We can do standalone reconstructions in areas like this, but most of the time we're partnering with Iowa DNR through the Prairie Partners Program and or with the USDA through some sort of farm bill program. We also target pasture conversions, seeding fallow areas, even cool season grass areas like lawns, for example, in certain areas that may not qualify for farm bill programs. Again, we try to use the flexibilities of the Partners Program to supplement, support, and really build a portfolio of conservation programs to get the most bang for our buck for the landowners, partners, and species that we manage for. And we can have great results from these types of projects too. So here's one example of a project that had incredible results very quickly. So this is the Nestle Valley Wildlife Area managed by the Winneshiek County Conservation Board. I apologize for not having the before pictures on this, but I think most folks on the webinar are familiar with what a bean stubble field looks like. So this area came out of ag production in 2018, was in bean stubble that spring, the spring of 2019, which actually provides a pretty good seed bed for seeding that native cover. The area was then seeded in June of 2019. And then once you fast forward to July of 2020, which when this picture was taken, this is what we see. So this is an area that is providing tremendous foraging habitat for bumblebees and native pollinators, but also for nesting and foraging cover for grassland and forest birds, as well as bedding cover for white-tailed deer for folks who may identify as hunter conservationists. We've kind of found a niche where folks can get on board behind pollinators. This kind of unites people. Same with the monarch butterfly, but that doesn't mean that has to be your value. It doesn't have to be your interest. If you're into birds, just the aesthetics, if you're a legacy landowner, these projects all can help you reach your goals too. Rusty Patch Bumblebee was actually documented at this site in July of 2022, right around the time that this picture was taken. So just 1 year after coming out of production, an endangered species found the site and was actually using it. I think this is actually incredible that it had an immediate impact for species like this. I think it's important to note that when we're talking about pollinators, we're not exclusively targeting prey restoration or reconstruction. In fact, we're finding out that adjacent woodland habitats are just as, if not more, important to bumblebees. So much like the hill prairie example that I showed you a few slides ago, this is what you typically see in some of these areas. A lot of eastern red cedar, overstocked, very little herbaceous plant community and understory. Okay, but again, so these areas, given a fighting chance and some support, these areas are also highly resilient and they respond well to restoration. So we also target degraded oak savanna or woodlands because they provide important habitat during several stages of the bumblebee life cycle. So moving forward, we plan to implement at least 5,000 acres of habitat restoration and enhancements in these high potential primary dispersal zones across the Midwest region in the next 5 years, with about 2,500, about half of those acres, of those impacted acres coming from Iowa. I think as more populations come up, as more partners come on board, I hope that this is actually a conservative estimate of what will actually take place. It's also important to recognize the partners in which we work with, because we, the Fish and Wildlife Service, can't do this alone. Practical Farmers of Iowa, they've been a tremendous partner in this effort, both from an outreach standpoint as well as a grant administration standpoint, because a lot of times we use our funds as seed money to gain or to get extra funds to do some of these projects. The same is true of the Iowa National Heritage Foundation. Iowa Soybean Association is emerging as a really strong partner of ours, not only in this effort, but on the Topeka Shiner efforts in Northwest Iowa. They also receive tremendous support from folks like Zurich Society. Of course, I mentioned the Iowa DNR a few times now, but also Iowa State University is joining the trip. So generally speaking, the Partners Program doesn't do a great job of monitoring our projects for species response. Some of our field biologists are now starting to use camera traps to document presence of species, but that's really about it in most cases, as we're usually focused on finishing up one project and moving on to the next. Well, with the help of colleagues in our ecological services and science application program, we're funding a project with researchers at the Iowa Cooperative Fish and Wildlife Research Unit at Iowa State University to get some assistance with this. So we're bringing on 2 graduate students this summer to help us understand the impact a project like these may be having, and hopefully to help inform how we do projects moving forward. So the focus of this research is really twofold. first from an organismal standpoint, as well as from a landscape standpoint. Through this research, we will survey sites and measure general bumblebee occupancy and density at multiple locations in Iowa, with a particular focus on rusty patch bumblebee and American bumblebee. Now, what I think is really cool about this is that about half the sites are former partners projects that were completed on private lands, beginning in about 2017 through 2021. Very rarely do we get to have actual research done on the project, so it's something that we're really excited about in the program. So we're hoping to collect and release individuals, assess individual condition, and then take tissue samples for DNA analysis of population genetic structure. We then hope to evaluate the effects of local landscape habitat factors on variables related to individual population health within Iowa. So the project is also likely going to contribute to other ongoing efforts to monitor those effects from the population genetic structure, risk resilience, things like this. My hope is that we can use this research to inform habitat management, as well as outreach strategies for the partners program and other partners we work with as we move and target rusty patch bumblebee recovery. So I guess I'm really excited is that when opportunities present themselves, we also try to complete the strategic habitat conservation wheel from our own projects when we have the opportunity. So in conclusion, we aim to deliver strategic habitat conservation. Our projects are relatively small. They may look random in how they're selected, but hopefully I've been able to demonstrate we actually take several factors into consideration before implementing our projects and using our resources. So the Northeast Iowa Pollinator Initiative is just one example of how the service can assist with habitat restoration enhancement. But there's other areas that we can work too. It's not just endangered species. If you meet some of those other criteria that I've talked about, we can probably help you too. So if you have a project in mind where you see space for the partners program in your work area, please reach out. We'd be more than happy to explore ways in which we can be relevant to you, or which programs actually might be able to help you reach your goals. So with that, I'm kind of done with my presentation. Please feel free to write down the cell or the phone number there from the office. Email actually is probably a better way to get hold of me. But with that, a couple of housekeeping matters, and I might actually kick it back over to Matt for these while questions.
And feel free to type in some questions for Drew, and we'll go back. So if you need CCA CEUs, please email Liz Ripley, ejukums@iastate.edu by 5 o'clock today with your name, the name you entered to watch the webinar, and your CCA number. And Liz is, as always, getting that put in the chat box where to send that, ejukums@iastate.edu. And then maybe we can go to the next slide, Drew. And this will be Dr. Bill Crumpton from Iowa State University about looking at integrating drainage improvement and wetland restoration, looking at the environmental impacts of improved drainage and targeted wetland restoration. So tune in next week for that one. So if maybe you can stop sharing and so we can see you, folk, because we did get a couple questions, and feel free to type others in. The first one is, does burn timing affect pollinators?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. So, overall, I'm a big proponent of prescribed planting. I think we need more of it on the landscape because that's one of the disturbances that kept these areas diverse, kept the forests and kept these systems the way they are. I think when we talk about species like rusty patch bumblebee, because of listing status or once you start working within a set of programs, there's rules that you have to follow or things that best management practice needs to be mindful of. But at the end of the day, for me, it's that we need to keep disturbance on this landscape. When you can, maybe break up the property into sections so you're not burning an entire area at the same time. So you're leaving some existing habitat, you're leaving refugia for these areas, for these species. But overall, I think prescribed burning is needed, especially if we're targeting species like rusty patch bumblebee, American bumblebee, the monarch bumblebee. Absolutely have to do.
There's been a little bit of audio problems, so that you might have there. It kind of comes in and out. We've tried what we could, but it still, your audio, Drew, just comes in and out a little bit. Yeah. We're also gonna try when in the recording, if we can, or when we archive it, if we can bring out the audio a little bit more. There was another. You could try that, I guess. We could try that and see if that helps at all. Okay, there is one person that indicated if you could show your email address again, so maybe you can share that screen. But there was another question. Does the Fish and Wildlife Service do any work in establishing beaver in headwater streams?
Establishing what's that?
Beaver. Establishing beaver in headwater streams.
So not establishing beaver in headwater streams. We do wetland restoration, which, can create areas that draw in beavers or that they might be attracted to. I know a colleague of mine, the same gentleman, Derek Wiseman, who's leading our oxbow restoration efforts. He's also done these projects using beaver dam analogs. Basically, you found small trees or wooden posts into small order streams, essentially act as a beaver dam. And then you kind of leave willow sticks, things like that through them, slows water down. Again, it's kind of a technique or a practice to try to restore wetlands or get beavers into certain areas, but specifically targeting beaver introductions, that's something that we don't do, at least here in Iowa. And also, I put my email in the chat so folks have that. Unfortunately, I do not have a headset I can use. I apologize.
So, yeah, that's what I was going to say. And I don't know if there's any background noise outside that might be impacting, because it kind of cute. Okay. I guess, yeah, because there's another question. Let's just double check that. If you go to your audio settings, is there one on suppress background noise? Go down to the lower left. I muted myself. If you go down to audio settings, whether there's go to the down at the lower left with the mute button, and then if you go to the audio settings in there, if there's something on the suppress the background noise, because it seems like at times it's
so I just I changed that setting. Hopefully it works a little better.
Right now it's working pretty good, so we'll see. Okay, so here's we've got a specific question on some of the oak savanna restoration. What are some of the understory plants you recommend for the oak savanna areas, i.e. easy to establish, etc.?
So that's a good question. So usually on oak savanna, the woodland areas, we're not really seeding those areas. We try to target those areas that were formerly in that cover type or were formerly woodland and savanna to do the restoration to get it back. So a lot of times most of the time it's woody species removal. It could be invasive species such as buckthorn, bush honeysuckle, but also eastern red cedar. Also clearing out some of your other species, hackberries, cherries, species like that that are really crowding out and shading out those understory species. But as far as seeding things, we don't do that. We kind of let that kind of run its course and those species come back naturally if that seed bank is still present.
You got another one. So online tools such as iNaturalist are gaining momentum. Any interest from partners in an organized effort to document species on their land, maybe even targeting certain species or times of year?
So I do know that some of our models, so for example, that rusty patch bumblebee model, it does tie in, integrate, or at least pull data from some of these online databases. iNaturalist, I'm not sure if it links with that one, but some of the bee and pollinator ones, I know it does, and that's how we actually get occurrence records. So, we tell folks, predominantly the private landowners that we work with, if that's something that they're interested in, if they're really into that, we encourage them to get set up on those sites. A lot of the naturalists with the county conservation boards, they're aware with those sites too. But as far as which specific ones that or those databases that our systems integrate with, I'm not sure, but I do know at least for rusty badge bumblebee, and I would imagine if anything happens with American bumblebee, it will be the same case. But we do integrate with some of those systems to get our occurrence records.
Those are all of the questions. Really, thank you, Drew, for providing this presentation, important information. And I hope there are some folks, maybe you've gotten some questions directly to you.
Not that I'm seeing, actually. No, I guess again, I thank everybody for the time. Thanks for folks for listening in. I put my email there in the chat. I'll put my phone number as well again.
And while you're putting that there, one more came in. Is there a minimum restoration area recommended to establish habitat?
No, we don't have minimum or maximum acreage requirements. We've done small areas. A lot of times, if we focus on education, for example, we can do a schoolyard habitat project. We do kind of keep a focus on education as well. So we can do areas that are kind of classified in square feet all the way up to, 250, 300 acres. It's really about what's going on with that project, what partners bring it to the table, where it's located within our focus area, and what we think we can benefit. That's how we approach it. But yeah, no minimum and maximum.
Okay. Great. That's a good place to end it. So thank you again, Drew, for this. And I hope that some people, if nothing else, got your information to reach out if they have things they want to visit further about. So thanks again.
Thank you, folks.